The Type 1934A 1944 is a German Battle Rating 4.0 Tier 1 destroyer that's immediately available for research upon starting the German Blue Water Tree. It's a variant of the Type 1934A destroyer with an improved anti-air loadout, trading one of its main cannons for a massive increase in secondary firepower. So, is it a valuable asset for the German lineup and a good first destroyer? First, a bit of history on the Type 1934A class. The Type 1934A class is a successor to the Type 1934 class, having a different bow for improved seakeeping. The first ships of the class were commissioned in 1937. 4 ships of the class were sunk on April 13, 1940 during the Second Battle of Narvik, with 3 other ships of the class being sunk during World War II. Out of the remaining 5, 2 were transferred to France, 1 was transferred to the United Kingdom, and 2 were transferred to the Soviet Union. The last ships of the class, Z6 and Z15, were decommissioned and scrapped in 1958. In War Thunder, the Type 1934A 1944 comes in a late loadout with only 4 12.7cm SK-C-34 cannons in single turrets. These have an actual bore diameter of 128mm and not 127mm, but it's a small difference. These have best-in-class accuracy for destroyer weaponry and have an excellent fire rate of 18 RPM for the first 10 shells, then dropping down to 15 shells per minute after the ready racks are depleted, which is still significantly above average. These mounts also have a very slow rotation rate, maxing out at 8 degrees per second, making it difficult to change targets between sides of the ship. The ship also doesn't carry many shells, only having a reserve of 480, which can only sustain fire for about 8 minutes, so choosing how many of each shell type to bring is important. They get 3 shell types: high explosive with a base fuse, and high explosive with a timed fuse. The standard HE shells have the most filler and are generally the best choice for handling enemy destroyers, but deal minimal damage to cruisers and armored destroyers such as the Fletcher. This should make up a majority of any ammunition load, as it's the best shell for the most common targets the Type 1934A 1944 faces. The HE base fuse shells sacrifice 30% of their explosive filler for a very slight increase in penetration, but it's enough to get past the anti-fragmentation armor and deal a bit more damage to destroyers. However, they're much worse against standard destroyers unless you're directly hitting their ammo racks. If you're confident in your ability to hit enemy turrets or avoid the anti-fragmentation armor on the hulls, this ammo isn't really necessary against destroyers, but I would generally recommend it for fighting cruisers. Last comes the timed fuse ammunition, which provides the cannons with some anti-air capability. The SK-C-34 mount is too slow to track aircraft, but the high fire rate does help in dealing with them. However, it's not a worthwhile shell to bring, as the Type 1934A 1944 secondaries are more than adequate to deal with aircraft. For secondary cannons, the Type 1934A 1944 gets 7 dual 37mm LM42 autocannon mounts, a dual 20mm C30 mount, and a quad 20mm Flak Vierling 38 mount. The 37mm cannons are the strongest and most unique aspect of the ship, giving it one of the most powerful anti-air and anti-ship secondary loadouts for its battle rating. It can tear apart aircraft, coastal ships, and even destroyers quite easily. With 8 cannons on a single target, it can put out around 2,000 shells per minute. The fire rate's actually pretty hard to figure out since the numbers aren't very apparent in game, but it's certainly higher than a 40mm Bofors autocannon and never overheats. These are absolutely worth controlling at close range, having extremely high damage output and firing enough shells to make it easy to hit small targets by spraying wildly. Their main disadvantage is that by firing so many shells at once, some of them don't even seem to register, making the damage output lower than it should theoretically be. The 37mm gets 3 clip types: Universal, HE, and APT. Both belts have the same shell types with different mixes, but generally the HE clips have the best damage output against most targets. It's also worth bringing a few APT clips for tankier or armored ships. You can also just bring purely Universal for less micromanagement, since with so many shells going out at once, clip composition is a marginal difference. The 20mm cannons aren't particularly noteworthy, making a good anti-air defense at close range, but easily being overshadowed by the firepower of the 37mm autocannons. Lastly, for the Type 1934A 1944's weaponry comes 8 G7A torpedoes split into 2 quad launchers and 4 depth charge mortars. The torpedoes have pretty good stats, particularly with their long range of 14 kilometers. However, they're pretty easy to detonate with direct fire, so whether or not they're worth bringing is a matter of opinion. The depth charge mortars are about as bad as normal depth charges, of course. The Type 1934A 1944's survivability is pretty average. It has a high crew count of 325 and a hull split into 8 sections, though its relatively small size makes it easy to saturate with high explosive ammunition. Its mobility is a bit above average at 70 km per hour. It's not a major advantage, but the above average speed does make it a bit easier to get into close range to use the 37mm autocannons. For playstyle, the Type 1934A-1944 is surprisingly a generalist. The four 127mm cannons still provide some of the best overall firepower on a destroyer at 4.0 regardless of the range, while the 37mm cannons create an effective no-fly zone and keep any smaller vessels away. It can do well as an escort for allies to keep aircraft away, a long-range sniper with its highly accurate and powerful cannons, or a short-range brawler with the overwhelming firepower of its flood of 37mm shells. Really, it's just a good ship. It can do about anything pretty well. It also fills a particularly good role as a teaching vessel for a player who's new to the Blue Water Fleet. It has high fire rate cannons with great accuracy and is particularly resilient against aircraft and torpedo boats due to its 37mm cannons, while not having crutches that impede learning like the anti-fragmentation armor on American destroyers. It provides all the tools to perform well without holding the player back or encouraging bad habits, so it's a good choice to grind this out first when starting on the Blue Water Fleet. The German Tree's destroyers in general are excellent at this role, so I'd highly recommend it for new players. So, as for if the ship is worth unlocking or not, absolutely. It's the best of the German Tier 1 ships, cheap to unlock, strong, and good to learn with. So, overall, I would highly recommend it. Even if you haven't played the German Tree at all, it should only take a few matches to unlock, and it's a pretty good ship. For modifications, I would recommend this order. Toolset, Fire Protection System, Rudder Replacement, Anti-Air Targeting, Auxiliary Targeting, Primary Targeting, Shrapnel Protection, Propeller Replacement, and Engine Maintenance. For crew skills, get Leadership, Main Caliber Reload Speed, Crew Interchangeability, Fire Prevention, and Ship Control. Thank you for watching.